A scandal which has haunted the NHS for 40 years, but finally the families of thousands killed by contaminated blood will get answers. Infected with HIV and hepatitis C in the 70s and 80s, now the whole sorry affair will be investigated by an inquiry.
This is the last chance we're going to have, we feel. If this doesn't get to the truth, I don't think there's really any fight left in anybody anymore.
Tonight we look at the worst treatment disaster in the history of the NHS, compounded by what campaigners claim was a cover-up.
This is ITV News at 10 with Raghi Omar.
Good evening. The wheels of justice may only be starting to turn decades after the NHS contaminated blood scandal, but it is justice. The question now is, how far will that justice reach? 2,400 people died after being given blood products infected with HIV or hepatitis C in the 70s and 80s. Many more became seriously ill. Now, at long last, the government has announced an inquiry into what's said to be the worst single scandal in NHS history. Theresa May's office called it an appalling tragedy that has caused unimaginable hardship and pain. Campaigners immediately demanded a full Hillsborough-style investigation with the possibility of criminal charges at the end of it.
I was infected with HIV, hepatitis C and hepatitis B at the age of 5.
We've been sick since childhood. We will never know the adults we could have been. We will never know the lives we could have had.
It turned out to be the biggest mistake he and all the other haemophiliacs would make in their life.
Thousands of lives lost, thousands more blighted. The greatest disaster to beset the NHS. 30 years on, the survivors will get their inquiry.
I started this battle in a room full of men who are no longer here. They have died horrible deaths. There is nothing nice about dying from liver disease. Some of them have died deaths that I wouldn't have wished on my worst enemy.
Bruce Norval contracted hepatitis C at just 5 years old. His story is horribly typical. As a haemophiliac in the 70s and 80s, he was treated with blood clotting agents that were imported and carried infection. Most of the contaminated products came from America, where donors had been paid to give blood. Potentially fatal hepatitis C infected more than 6,000 people, though some estimates put the figure far higher. While HIV has affected more than 1,500 patients, in total leading to the deaths of more than 2,400 people.
The victims and their families have suffered pain and hardship, and they deserve answers, and the inquiry that I've announced today will give them those answers, so they will know why this happened, how it happened. This was an appalling tragedy and it should never have happened.
Baby Jason, 4 days old.
One of those who died was Jonathan Evans, whose son Jason says it's time to end the secrecy that surrounded this tragedy.
Certainly now we have to concentrate on getting the terms of reference correct, and also making sure the inquiry has the correct powers to get to the truth.
This is quite simply the worst peacetime disaster that nobody talks about.
Andy Evans was 5 when he contracted hepatitis C as a result of contaminated blood. He was later diagnosed with HIV and has campaigned for this day ever since.
This is the last chance we're going to have, we feel. If this doesn't get to the truth, I don't think there's really any fight left in anybody anymore.
The drugs that keep Andy Evans alive today have painful side effects, but he is desperate to see justice, even if it's already taken far too long. Paul Davis, News at 10.
I'm joined now by the Greater Manchester Mayor and former Labour Health Secretary Andy Burnham, who is among those who's led calls for an inquiry. Thanks very much for joining us, Mr. Burnham. You were very deeply involved around the Hillsborough inquiry. Do you think that this scandal calls for an inquiry of the same kind of magnitude and scope of Hillsborough?
Yes, I do, Raghi. And there are two things that it should follow the Hillsborough model on. Number one, full disclosure of all papers held by the government, nothing at all withheld. Number two, this needs not just to look at the original negligence, but also the cover-up that followed. I believe that was a cover-up on an industrial scale, and that needs to be exposed.
And what do you think, if you call it a criminal cover-up on an industrial scale, what do you think the consequences therefore should be?
Well, first of all, like Hillsborough, we have to establish the truth. But once you've established the truth then has its own power. And as we've seen with Hillsborough, justice has followed in that case. And following justice, there then needs to be accountability. And I want to see exactly the same here. Those responsible held to account. This day has taken far, far too long in coming. All political parties have failed those affected by contaminated blood. We must now all work together to ensure they get truth and justice without any further delay.
I mean, truth and justice is what a lot of the families affected, of course, want. 2,400 people are not around as a result of this scandal. Do you think that this should also look into the question of compensation?
Yes, I do. Over the years, a few scraps have been thrown off the table towards those who've suffered. And by the way, it goes far further than a couple of thousand. Many, many tens of thousands of lives have been blighted by this scandal. Children who've never seen their parents, families really torn apart. So after we've got the full truth, then finally I believe the country will come behind the victims and demand that they get proper recompense for the loss they've suffered.
And very briefly, Mr. Burnham, what about, the idea of a sort of police investigation in this?
Well, I believe the best way to get to the truth as quickly as possible is through a Hillsborough-style inquiry, and I'm pleased that that has been set up today. But as we've seen with Hillsborough, it is possible that prosecutions may eventually follow. So I would say that nothing should be off limits. I have seen evidence of a criminal cover-up. I have seen evidence of people's medical records falsified to suggest that they had caused their own liver damage, to suggest that they were alcoholic and not that the damage was caused by the negligence of the state. So all of this has to be exposed, and yes, this should result in prosecutions if the evidence supports it.
Andy Burnham, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Thank you.